Welcome back. If you've ever been part of a clinical trial or you're preparing to join one, chances are you've heard terms like Trial Master File, ISF, Essential Documents, or even Audit Trail thrown around in meetings, SOPs, or inspection prep checklists. At first glance, they might sound like just another set of folders or files, but in reality, these are the backbone of your trial's credibility, compliance, and inspectability. In this tutorial, we're going to walk through some of the most important but often underestimated aspects of clinical research documentation. These are not just regulatory requirements, they are the proof that your study happened the way you said it did. We'll cover four critical areas: the Trial Master File, TMF, and Investigator Site File, ISF, what they are, how they differ, and what must be included. The essential document list per ICH-GCP, the documents you need before, during, and after the trial. Archiving and retention periods, because long after a trial is done, you still need to protect its legacy. And finally, audit trails and data integrity, how we ensure that clinical trial data remains traceable, trustworthy, and tamper-proof. Whether you're a sponsor, CRA, study coordinator, or medical affairs professional reviewing evidence generation plans, this tutorial will give you the clarity and confidence to understand why documentation isn't just paperwork. It's proof of ethical conduct, scientific rigor, and regulatory compliance. Let's get started. As said, if you worked before in a clinical trial, you've probably heard someone say, make sure that goes in the TMF, or has that document been filed in the ISF? And maybe you've wondered, what exactly are these files? Why do we have two of them? And why are they treated like gold during inspections? Well, let's break it down together. So, what is the Trial Master File, TMF? The Trial Master File is essentially the central hub of documentation for a clinical trial. Think of it as the official record of the entire trial from start to finish. It includes all the essential documents that individually and collectively demonstrate that the trial was conducted in compliance with Good Clinical Practice, GCP. The rights and well-being of participants were protected, and the trial data is credible and reliable. The TMF is typically maintained by the sponsor or the CRO, and it covers every country, every site, and every phase of the study. It's not just a collection of random files. It's organized, indexed, and regularly reviewed. And during regulatory inspections, it's often the first thing auditors ask to see. So what's in it? You'll find the protocol and amendments, investigator brochures, ethics approvals, monitoring plans and visit reports, site initiation documents, safety reports, final clinical study report, signed contracts and agreements, delegation logs, regulatory authority approvals, serious adverse event tracking, and much more. Basically, if it happened in the trial, there should be evidence of it in the TMF. What about the Investigator Site File, ISF? The Investigator Site File, or ISF, is like the TMF's sibling, but at the site level. While the TMF is centralized and usually maintained by the sponsor or CRO, the ISF is maintained on-site by the principal investigator or their delegate. It contains copies of many of the same essential documents, but specifically those relevant to that one site. It's tailored to that location, to that PI, and to that group of trial participants. So, what goes into the ISF? You'll find site-specific versions of the protocol and ICF's IRB approvals and communications, investigator CVs and GCP training certificates, drug accountability logs, delegation of authority logs, monitoring visit logs, patient screening and enrollment logs, signed informed consent forms, communication records with the sponsor or CRO. The ISF is a live document set. It evolves throughout the trial. And just like the TMF, it needs to be complete, current, and audit ready at all times. So, how do TMF and ISF fit together? Now here's where it gets interesting. The TMF and ISF are two parts of the same puzzle. The TMF shows the big picture. It documents how the entire study was planned, managed, and executed across all sites. The ISF shows the site-specific story, how the trial was conducted for each set of participants under a particular investigator's supervision. Regulators will often compare the two. For example, they might look at the monitoring report in the TMF and then want to verify that the corrective actions were implemented at the site, evidenced in the ISF. Consistency matters. Alignment between these two files tells regulators that your trial was organized, well managed, and compliant. But there are common pitfalls to avoid. One of the most common findings during inspections is incomplete or missing documentation, especially in the TMF or ISF. Here are a few common issues: outdated or unsigned documents, missing delegation logs, no documentation of protocol amendments, unreported serious adverse events, lack of correspondence records with the IRB or sponsor, missing patient consent forms or screening logs, and the consequences? Well, it can lead to regulatory findings, site deactivation, data rejection, or worse, delays in product approval. So it's not just paperwork, it's your defense, your evidence, and your legacy in that trial. We have also to know that today, both TMF and ISF can be maintained as paper, electronic, or hybrid systems. But either way, they need to meet the same GCP requirements for security, version control, traceability, readiness for inspection. Sponsors are increasingly adopting eTMF platforms, which allow better real-time access, document versioning, audit trails, and oversight. At the site level, EISFs are gaining ground too, especially with remote monitoring becoming the norm. Just remember, electronic doesn't mean less effort. It means different responsibilities in terms of access control, metadata, and system validation. Now we will move to an absolutely essential matter to every clinical trial: documentation. More specifically, we're diving into two critical concepts: the essential document list, as defined by ICH-GCP, and the archiving and retention periods you need to follow once the trial is over. Let's start by defining what are essential documents. ICH-GCP E6R2 defines essential documents as those which individually and collectively permit evaluation of the conduct of a clinical trial and the quality of the data produced. In simpler terms, they tell the story of the trial: who did what, when, where, how, and whether it was done right. These documents are needed before the trial starts, during the trial, and after the trial ends. They're used by investigators, sponsors, CROs, ethics committees, auditors, and inspectors. So if you're involved in a clinical study, chances are you're creating, reviewing, or storing some of these documents every day. Let's break it down. The ICH-GCP guideline actually groups essential documents into three main stages. 1. Before the clinical phase of the trial begins. These documents establish that all parties are qualified, that approvals are in place, and the site is ready. Examples include final approved protocol and amendments, investigator brochure, IB, informed consent form, ICF, and subject information sheets, IRB, IEC approval letters, signed clinical trial agreements, CTAs, delegation of authority logs, investigator CVs and GCP certificates, financial disclosure forms, regulatory authority approval, if applicable. This is your trial's foundation. No trial should begin without them. 2. During the clinical conduct of the trial, these documents show how the trial is being implemented, how issues are being handled, and whether it's running according to plan. These include signed informed consent forms per participant, monitoring visit reports, Updated delegation logs, adverse event, AE/SAE reports, protocol deviation logs, drug accountability records, laboratory certifications, and normal ranges, subject enrollment logs, correspondence with IRB, sponsor, CRO. They tell the real-time story of how the trial is unfolding. 3. After completion or termination of the trial. These documents are needed to confirm that all obligations have been fulfilled and that data is complete and credible. Examples include final clinical study report, closeout monitoring visit report, final drug accountability and destruction records, archiving confirmation, subject identification codes for follow-up, IRB/IEC notifications of completion. And yes, these documents must be retained for inspection, sometimes for years. Now that leads us into the next big question. How long do you keep these documents? The short answer is, it depends. But let's break it down using the ICH-GCP guideline as a baseline. According to ICH E6R2, essential documents should be retained for at least 2 years after the last approval of a marketing application in an ICH region, or until there are no pending or planned applications, whichever is longer. Let that sink in. Even if the study ended 2 years ago, if the sponsor is still submitting data from that trial to regulators, you cannot destroy anything. And if a study is terminated prematurely, the same rule applies. You still retain the documents for 2 years following regulatory decisions. But wait, local regulations may differ. Some countries require longer retention periods, up to 15 years or more. For example, in the EU, retention may go up to 25 years for certain trials. In the US, the FDA generally aligns with the 2-year minimum, but may require longer, depending on the study phase and product life cycle. Some sponsors even have internal policies that mandate retention for up to 15 years or more. That's why it's so important to check ICH-GCP local regulatory requirements, sponsor SOPs, your institution's policy. Before you ever shred a document or delete a file, ask, are we truly done with this study from a regulatory standpoint? This is important and challenging because we all know that keeping track of 100+ documents across multiple stakeholders isn't easy. But you may remember before we said, it's not about bureaucracy, it's about accountability. Essential documents. Protect participants. Support product approvals. Enable inspections. And validate the science behind our work. And when they're properly archived and retained, they allow for transparency long after the trial ends. Imagine someone questioning the data 5 years later. You need the documentation to defend the science and the ethics. No documentation equals no defense. Here, we will shift gears and talk about the audit trails and data integrity. If you're collecting ECRF data, reviewing a monitoring report, or preparing for an inspection, these two concepts are absolutely essential for maintaining trust in the trial's outcome. So, let's see what is an audit trail. And let's start with a simple question. If someone changes a data point in your clinical database, how would you know? That's where audit trails come in. An audit trail is an automated, time-stamped record that logs all changes made to electronic clinical trial data. Think of it like the black box on an airplane. It doesn't stop things from going wrong, but it tells the full story of what happened, when it happened, who did it, and why. So, what does an audit trail typically capture? Who made the entry or change? User ID. What data was changed? Before and after values. When it was changed? Timestamp. Why it was changed? A reason if required by system config. Let's say a data manager updates a patient's visit date. The audit trail would record user, name original entry, new entry timestamp, reason. This ensures transparency and supports reconstructing the trial. which is one of the fundamental goals of GCP. Then, where are audit trails used? They apply to any electronic system used in clinical trials. ECRFs, electronic case report forms, EPROs, patient-reported outcomes, IVRS, IWRS systems, safety databases, electronic trial master file, eTMF, even email or document systems in some cases. And here's a key point. ICH E6R2 and FDA 21, CFR Part 11 require that audit trails be secure, independent, and tamper-proof. You cannot delete them. You cannot alter them. They are permanent. That's why system validation and vendor compliance matter. If your system lacks a proper audit trail, it could be considered non-compliant, even if your trial was run ethically. Now, let's zoom out and talk about data integrity, the broader concept that audit trails help protect. Data integrity refers to the completeness, consistency, and accuracy of data throughout its life cycle, from collection and processing to reporting and archiving. Why does this matter so much? Because regulatory authorities like the FDA, EMA, and MHRA have repeatedly found trial data that was either incomplete, altered, without explanation, duplicated, fabricated, or worse, deleted. And when that happens, the entire credibility of the clinical program is at risk. Regulatory approval could be delayed, rejected, or revoked. To guide industry best practices, regulators introduced a concept called ALCOA+, which outlines the attributes of reliable clinical data. Attributable, who did it? Legible, can you read it? Contemporaneous, was it recorded in real time? Original, is this the first point of capture? Accurate, is it true? And the plus adds more. Complete, no data is missing or selectively reported. Consistent, across systems and records. Enduring, maintained over time, available for inspection and review. So when someone says your data must be ALCOA plus compliant, this is what they mean. It's not just about numbers, it's about the trustworthiness of your trial results. It is also important to know what happens when data integrity is compromised. Let's not sugarcoat this. Compromised data integrity can lead to regulatory warning letters or trial rejection, inability to reconstruct the trial, lost time, lost credibility, and lost investment, even criminal investigations in cases of fraud. We've seen real-world examples where entire drug applications were delayed for years or completely derailed because one site or vendor couldn't maintain proper data practices. Then, how do you protect audit trails and data integrity? A few best practices. Use validated electronic systems with secure audit trails. Train all site and sponsor staff on documentation standards. Monitor for inconsistent or missing data regularly. Lock systems appropriately, e.g., restrict access post-finalization. Conduct routine, quality control, and QA audits. Never backdate, overwrite, or delete entries. Explain them instead. Include audit trail reviews in your monitoring visits and closeout reports. And finally, make this a cultural value, not just a compliance checklist. Data integrity isn't just the job of the data manager. It belongs to everyone in the study, from the PI to the sponsor to the medical affairs colleague reviewing outputs. That is to say, audit trails are your digital fingerprint of what happened in the study. Data integrity is the overall trustworthiness of the data from start to finish. And that brings us to the end of this essential tutorial on clinical trial documentation and data integrity. We've covered a lot, but every piece we explored plays a vital role in ensuring that clinical trials are not only conducted ethically and scientifically, but also stand up to regulatory scrutiny. We began with the Trial Master File, TMF, and Investigator Site File, ISF, and how each acts as the official story of your trial, from both sponsor and site perspectives. Then we broke down the essential document list per ICH-GCP, highlighting which documents must be in place before, during, and after the study to prove compliance. We touched on archiving and retention, understanding how long records need to be maintained and why that matters for future audits, inspections, or submissions. And finally, we emphasized audit trails and data integrity, showing how transparency, traceability, and trust are embedded in how we manage trial data. So whether you're setting up your first trial or managing a global portfolio of studies, remember this: your documentation isn't just for the regulators. It's a reflection of your professionalism, your commitment to ethical science, and the trust patients place in us to do things right. Thanks for joining me in this session, and as always, stay compliant, stay curious, and keep raising the bar in clinical research. See you in the next tutorial.